moon hung low, casting an eerie glow over the fields. A haunting stillness enveloped the farmhouse, broken only by the soft rustle of wind through the corn. It was a quiet night, the kind that makes you forget the outside world. But out in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the light, two figures moved like phantoms, intent and silent. They crept closer, their hearts pounding like war drums in their chests. Tommy and Greg, two small-time burglars driven more by desperation than skill. Tommy, with scruffy hair and a face peppered with anxiety, glanced at Greg, who was stocky and tense, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. They had targeted this farmhouse, thinking it an easy mark, a place where riches lay hidden behind weathered walls. "Let's just get in and out," Greg whispered, his voice tight and urgent. "No one's here." But Tommy wasn't convinced. He said, his hand rubbing nervously against the cold metal of the crowbar tucked into his pocket. "Stop being a coward," Greg hissed, impatience boiling beneath his skin. "We need the money." They moved toward the front porch, careful to keep their footfalls light on the creaking boards. The farmhouse loomed like an ancient guardian, its dark windows staring down at them suspiciously. Tommy swallowed hard, the reality of their situation clawing at him like a chilly breeze. As they approached the door, Tommy froze. A light flickered on inside, illuminating a figure in a worn-out armchair. It was old man Jenkins, a legend in town. Grizzled, sun-baked, and oftentimes cranky, he had lived alone for decades, always known for keeping to himself. But tonight, the television cast an unusual glow around him, and he was awake. Come on," Greg urged, pressing against the door. "He's watching TV." With a shaky hand, Tommy forced himself to nod, his instincts screaming to turn back. They fumbled with the lock, the bitter cold metal biting into their fingers before the door finally clicked open. It swung inward, revealing the musty scent of old wood and fading memories. The burglars slipped inside, hearts racing now, each thud echoing in their ears. In the living room, the flickering screen revealed a classic western, cowboys clashing against the backdrop of a sprawling desert. Old man Jenkins sat transfixed, oblivious to the tension building behind him. Stepping cautiously deeper into the house, the burglars could feel their breaths melding with the heavy air. Faded photographs littered the walls, stories of a life once vibrant, now overshadowed by the darkness of his solitude. Tommy couldn't shake the eerie feeling that they were intruding not just into a home, but into a man's very essence. "Search the place," Greg commanded, trying to suppress the twitching unease that settled deep in his gut. He moved toward the kitchen, the floorboards creaking beneath their weight, as if whispering secrets to the evening air. Tommy stayed by the living room, caught in the undertow of regret. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimmer on a shelf. An old gun, rusted and forgotten, lay tucked among dusty knickknacks. A wave of unease washed over him. He muttered under his breath. Greg shouted from the kitchen, his tone sharp. As Greg rifled through drawers and cabinets, searching for cash or valuables, Tommy resolved to keep watch. He felt like a moth fluttering too close to a flame, every instinct screaming at him to leave while they still could. But luck was not on their side. The old man shifted in his chair, the sound slicing through the tense atmosphere like a gunshot. Tommy's heart dropped. From the darkened corner, he could see Jenkins stir, his head lifting slightly, confusion flickering across his face. That moment felt like an eternity as he processed the foreign sensations creeping into his mind. Tommy whispered, the dread pooling deep within him. "No," Greg called, annoyance dripping from his voice. "He's asleep." But just as Greg finished his sentence, Jenkins let out a low groan, and Tommy knew this was no ordinary night. A pang of fear pierced through him as he watched the old man reach for a remote, seemingly oblivious to the intruders. Somehow that form of normalcy in such a chaotic moment was chilling. Then it happened. Jenkins' eyes shot wide open, darting around the room. The news blaring from the screen faded into heavy silence, suffocated by the weight of realization. He blinked and caught sight of the two figures, neither one of them positioned to flee, but instead, wrapped in the surreal panic of being caught. Their heartbeat collided with the crescendo of the moment. The old man's voice was like gravel, raspy yet commanding. A sentinel awakened in the night, sensing the violation of his domain. Tommy reacted instinctively. "We're just looking for," he stammered, but the words fell flat. An instinctive grip of fear wrapped around him. "Get out," Jenkins growled, rising from his armchair, defiance erupting from the old man's frail form. He seemed to swell in size, glowing with a passion only desperation can ignite. Greg's eyes widened in disbelief. This was not the confrontation he had anticipated. But before they could react, Jenkins grabbed an old baseball bat that leaned against the wall, rusted yet resilient, just like him. He shouted, swinging the bat overhead. In that moment, time itself felt suspended. The tension grew into a palpable force, an electric current of three souls caught in a spiraling storm. Tommy's fight-or-flight response surged. He blurted out, his mind racing as adrenaline took hold. Jenkins roared, eyes wild. "You think you can just break in here and take what's mine?" Greg, realizing the danger, scrambled backward, barely avoiding the swing of the bat. Just as his back hit a cabinet, he drew in a deep breath, closing in on the fragile stranger. "Listen," he said, his voice wavering, "we just need a little cash." But the old man wasn't backing down, fueled by the years of struggle etched into his bones. "You don't get to make demands here," he retorted, taking a step forward, bat firmly in hand. Tommy turned towards the door, panic rising. "Let's just go." The old man's resolve spurred Greg into action, reacting with a mixture of aggression and desperation. "Stupid old man." He lunged toward Jenkins, hoping to disarm him, but Jenkins was ready. His instincts kicked in, honed from years of defending his territory. He sidestepped with surprising agility, swinging the bat once again. It missed Greg by inches, but not by luck. It was skill, however unrefined. With every strike, Jenkins felt his spirit ignite. This was his home, his life. No intruders would state nor threaten it under his watch. Tommy ducked from the chaotic energy that rippled through the room, adrenaline surging as he stumbled toward the door. He slammed it open, ready to flee into the night. Greg shouted as he scrambled back, but it was too late. Desperation blinded him as he careened toward the exit, the old man hot on his trail, the bat like a comet trailing behind. The night air hit him like a wave, unexpected and chilling, but Tommy wasn't stopping. He bolted into the darkness, his legs pumping like pistons. The sound of the bat hitting the porch steps echoed after him, punctuating the fear thrumming in his veins. Jenkins yelled, the rawness of his voice slicing through the night like a battle cry. Greg darted past Tommy, fury igniting the air between them. They had entered this farmhouse with grand dreams, but now they were nothing more than frightened shadows fleeing into a world they had underestimated. Jenkins followed them outside, bat raised high. The confrontation became a surreal performance for the moonlit sky. Tommy gasped, trying to comprehend the chaos spiraling around them. Just moments before, they had thought they would easy pickings. Now they were the hunted, cowering before a man who wouldn't let go of what was his. Greg shouted, his voice pulling them away from the story unfolding behind them. The chase led them through tall grass, the moonlight illuminating their path. They stumbled across gnarled roots and sharp stones, tearing at the fabric of the night. The crisp air mixed with the urgency in their breaths. What had felt like a petty crime now metamorphosed into a fight for their very lives. Two small-time burglars running from the persistence of a man forged from years of holding on. In the distance, the sound of a motorbike caught their attention. Tommy's heart raced, hope sparking against the backdrop of their fear. He cried as they stumbled onto a secluded dirt road. He yelled again, pushing himself faster. They ran side by side, adrenaline guiding them toward the beacon of escape. But just as they reached the bike, they finally noticed the flicker of headlights piercing through the trees. Their escape was now a flickering illusion. Tommy shouted, grabbing the handles of the motorbike, heart racing against the ticking clock. But Greg hesitated, his distrust for Tommy's recklessness surfacing. A shadow loomed behind them. Jenkins emerged from the tree line, bat poised like an executioner judging the worth of a life. He yelled, panic emanating from his worn features, mingled with the fire of someone who had finally found their courage. As he swung the bat, it missed Tommy by a hair's breadth, the force of it slicing through the air, echoing through the woods. It was a moment suspended in time, as if the universe held its breath, evaluating the outcome of this treacherous encounter. Tommy jumped onto the bike, fumbling with the keys. Greg reluctantly followed, finally realizing it was better to trust the fleeting chance than the looming darkness behind him. "Start it," Greg shouted, urgency distorting his voice. Just as the engine roared to life, a sudden weight of gravity pulled over them as Jenkins charged at them, bat raised high. With a jolt, Tommy twisted the throttle, feeling the rush of power beneath him. The tires screeched against the gravel as they tore down the dark road, hearts racing, bodies trembling. Behind them, Jenkins stood frozen, bat raised high like a war banner, his spirit aglow with the fierceness of survival. He had defended not just possessions, but the very essence of his identity, an old man refusing to let go. As they sped away, the realization hit Tommy like a ton of bricks. This was more than a heist, more than greed. It was a confrontation against desperation, a fight against time, and a clash of two worlds that might never understand each other. In that moment, under the blanket of night, he understood that life drew lines in unexpected places, binding together those who fight for what belongs to them against those who think it is theirs to take. They zoomed into the night, leaving behind whispers of what could have been a lesson forged in the fires of fear, a truth they would never forget. And as they vanished beneath the veil of darkness, the farmhouse stood stoically, an enduring guardian of stories untold, secrets held close, and the echo of an old man who refused to surrender. The wind howled through the trees, a mournful sound that carried with it an unsettling stillness. In the heart of the countryside, a lone farmhouse stood, its windows dark and unyielding against the night. To anyone else, it might have seemed a place of peace, but tonight it was a ticking clock, a battleground waiting to erupt. Deep in the shadows, two figures crept closer, their silhouettes barely discernible against the night sky. Rick and Tony, seasoned burglars with desperation etched across their faces. Tonight, they planned to make their mark, to step into the path of opportunity, into a home they believed would yield treasures just waiting to be plucked. "Stay low, keep quiet," Rick whispered, his voice a harsh whisper against the creeping shadows. They had managed to slip past the overgrown garden and reach the porch, each creak of wood beneath their feet a reminder of the risks they took. Rick's heart raced, not just with excitement but with the gnawing doubt that clawed at him. Every gut instinct told him they were pushing their luck. "Yeah, just hurry up," Tony muttered, anxiety radiating from him like heat. He was short of breath, every sound around them magnified into a cacophony. "There's nothing to worry about. We'll be in and out." They reached for the door, a worn slab of wood that had seen years of weather and time. Sticky with grime, it seemed to resist their touch. But with a swift, practiced motion, Rick slipped a slim tool from his pocket, his hand steady as he lifted the latch. The door creaked open, an ominous protest that sent shivers up their spines. Inside, the air felt thick, almost stale. A faint glow from a distant room illuminated dust motes dancing lazily in the air. It was a stark reminder of life that once thrived here. Old furniture littered the places where happy family gatherings might have occurred. Now it stood as testament to time's passage, a backdrop to their minds buzzing feverishly with the notion of easy wealth. "Let's keep moving," Tony urged, a shaky breath escaping his lips. They tiptoed through the hallway, past walls adorned with photographs of smiling faces and the harsh reality of life's fragility. But their eyes were set not on memories, but on potential loot. From the kitchen, the familiar scent of stale bread and something earthy filled the air. Rick felt his stomach churn, unease creeping in. He suggested, desperate to shake off the gnawing chill that prickled his spine. But before Tony could answer, a sound broke the silence, a soft thud, like a distant footstep that sent a shockwave of dread through them. Rick froze, instincts kicking in. They weren't alone. He whispered sharply, eyes wide with panic. Tony nodded, goosebumps rising on his arms. "Let's get out while we still can," Rick muttered, the thought of an encounter with the homeowner sending his heart racing. Yet just as they turned to head back, they heard it again, a louder thud, this time followed by a voice, low and grumbling, resonating through the old wooden floors. Every nerve in Rick's body screamed for action, his fight-or-flight response flaring to life in an instant. They were caught. There was nowhere to hide. If they made a sound, the homeowner would know they were there, and it would only take seconds for that knowledge to turn into confrontation. "Just stay calm," Tony whispered, his confidence wavering. "We can figure it out. If he comes down here, we can pretend." Rick shook his head. "No way." With muted footsteps, they silently slipped toward the nearest door, a study perhaps, filled with dusty books and forgotten dreams. They slipped inside just as the figure emerged from the shadows of the hallway, a man worn like the farmhouse itself. Harold the farmer appeared roughly in his 60s, his face weathered by years under the sun. He wore a plaid shirt, unmistakably familiar in the rural landscape. He squinted against the dim light, peering into the living room. He called, voice strong, seasoned by years of labor. Rick and Tony exchanged anxious glances, the weight of the moment pressing down on their chests. The farmer's voice rumbled like thunder, reverberating through the walls. He was no ordinary man. He had grown up amidst the strength of the land. In his call, they sensed not just an echo of authority, but an effort fueled by years of standing his ground. Tony breathed, clenching his fists. Rick's mind raced with options, none of them good. "We wait," he finally decided. They huddled in the dark, straining to hear the farmer's movements. The air was thick with tension, the kind that can snuff out the very breath from a man's lungs. It felt like an eternity as they listened to Harold pacing, frustration tinged with a hint of fear creeping into his muffled breaths. Rick thought about how this old man had built and fought for everything in his life. How many years of hard labor had led him to this moment? What were two desperate men like them compared to the essence of a life lived with purpose? Heart racing, he could almost feel the weight of the farmer's despair, and it hit him like a punch to the gut. The farmer barked suddenly, startling them both. "Show yourself." Rick leaned closer, clutching the side of the desk they hid behind. "He's not going to back down," he whispered fiercely. "He probably has a shotgun or SHH. Tony hissed, panic overtaking him. Lost in the chaos, whispering like an unforgiving gust, Rick's mind shifted to the strangest possibility. What if they simply explained themselves? Every fiber within him screamed to run, to flee from this place, but what if they spoke with the farmer instead of hiding in fear? Tony hissed, his face contorted with disbelief. "We're thieves." "I know," Rick whispered back, his heart pounding in his ears. He took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the desk, a strange sense of calm enveloping him as he did. He held his hands up, palms out in an effort to be non-threatening. "Sir," he called, voice steadying. "We're just a couple of low-life thieves." Harold interrupted, his eyes narrowing. The old man's hand twitched nervously at his side, the weight of a heavy past brushing against the skin of their confrontation. "We're just looking for a way to get by." In that moment, a flicker of confusion passed over the farmer's face, shadowed by years forged in relentless practicality. The adrenaline coursing through Rick seemed to spark doubt in Harold's eyes. Against the backdrop of wide-eyed panic, Rick pressed on, hoping to appeal to the humanity woven into the fabric of this man's life. "Please, just give us a chance to explain," Rick continued, his voice trembling yet persistent. "I have a family to take care of. We thought we could just grab a few things and be gone before anyone noticed." Silence filled the air, thick and heavy, as both men stood locked in a moment that felt entirely too fragile to breathe. Harold studied Rick, eyes narrowing, the weight of time and trials reflected in his gaze. He countered, the roughness in his tone giving way to something softer, something almost pained. "This land, these walls, they mean something to me more than just possessions." Rick felt his heart begin to race again, but not from fear. It was something deeper. "No, I don't mean to downplay that," he urged, his voice earnest. "I know what it's like to fight for something. I'm not here to take everything. I just want to survive." A silence fell between them, the weight of raw honesty hanging heavy in the air. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. Using the tranquil moment, Rick searched Harold's face for understanding, for the faintest glimmer of connection. The farmer finally spoke, his voice lowered, a resigned acceptance reflected in his features. "Out here, the land takes care of you." Tony looked at Rick, doubt still written all over his face. But something stirred in the silence, a shared thread between two very different lives rooted in well-worn struggles. "If it's just money you want," Harold continued slowly, voice steady, "I can't offer it, but you want to eat," Tony echoed, incredulous. The farmer let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. Believe me, lads, working a plot of land teaches you lessons no amount of money can buy. Rick glanced at Tony, uncertainty swirling inside him. This wasn't the way he had envisioned tonight ending, empowering in its own way. Harold continued, his tone firm yet strangely compassionate. You think life just hands you what you want? No, you have to dig up the roots, fight the weeds, and sweat until the ground gives back. Standing in that dim hallway, a battle between two worlds unfolded, a collision of hope and failure, of survival and morality. Rick felt a strange kind of clarity surge within him. Maybe their lives had been careening towards this moment for a reason, a chance to break free from old patterns and create something better. All right, Rick said finally, his voice steady now. How about we take you up on that? We'll work for you. Harold studied him carefully, skepticism lingering in his eyes, but the weight of trust slowly began to settle in. Yeah, Tony added, finding his voice again, I think we both need it. The old man chuckled softly, shaking his head once more as if the irony was not lost on him. All right then, you want a chance, prove it to me. In that moment, something shifted within Rick and Tony. They had entered the farmhouse seeking something to take, but it turned out they walked away with something far more profound. As the moon dipped low on the horizon and the darkness surrendered to dawn, the farmer welcomed them back into the world of hard work, a shared understanding melding their disparate lives into something new. There was still a long journey ahead, a road filled with challenges, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like there might be light at the end. In the weeks that followed, they came to understand that life was more than just possessions. It was about connection, roots, and resilience, the very fabric that binds us all together. And it all began that fateful night when two desperate souls entered a quiet farmhouse, unwittingly seeking the very heart of humanity. The night was thick and heavy, swathed in the kind of silence that steals your breath. Shadows danced beneath a waning moon, and in a secluded corner of the countryside, a farmhouse stood as an island of stillness amid the vast, dark sea of fields. To anyone else, it was a serene image, a simple place where a farmer might rest after a long day of toil. But tonight, it was a hive of tension, poised for an unexpected clash. Deep in the shadows, two figures crept forward, their forms barely visible against the velvety darkness. Jake and Tom, two thieves with desperation etched on their faces, moved like ghosts, muscles taut with anticipation. Tonight, they planned on breaking into the farmhouse, convinced it would be an easy score. The farmer, they reasoned, would be asleep, just an old man, alone and vulnerable in his home. Let's get this over with, Jake whispered, glancing nervously at Tom, who kept licking his lips as if tasting their imminent victory. Yeah, I can't wait to get my hands on some cash, Tom replied, his eyes wide with greed. He was younger, maybe in his early 20s, fueled by an undercurrent of adrenaline and foolish bravado. They approached the back door, its splintered wood seeming to whisper tales of better days. As they reached for the handle, a sudden gust of wind rattled the trees, sending a chill down Jake's spine. It was as if the world was urging them to turn back. But Tom, driven by impatience, pushed through the threshold. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old wood, memories clinging to every corner. The dim light from a single bulb hung overhead, casting long, haunting shadows across the floor. As they stepped into the room, a sense of unease washed over Jake. "Keep it down," he murmured, his voice just above a whisper. Tom nodded, eyes darting. Jake pointed to a hallway leading deeper into the house. "Let's check the living room." They crept through the narrow corridor, hearts pounding in their chests, a chorus of fear feeding what little courage they had left. Each slow step echoed like a ticking clock, counting down the seconds until disaster might strike. Suddenly, they heard a sound of shuffling mixed with the gentle creaking of floorboards. Both men froze, their breaths hitching in their throats. The noise came from the far end of the house, a low murmur that sent a jolt of terror coursing through their veins. Jake whispered, feeling the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Tom's eyes widened. "It must be the old man," he replied, voice trembling. A creeping dread settled in Jake's stomach. "We need to go," he said urgently, his instincts screaming for them to retreat. But Tom, driven by fear and stubbornness, shook his head. We can't leave empty-handed. Jake felt the weight of the choice before them. It was a dangerous game they were playing, and the stakes had grown higher with every passing moment. But Tom pushed forward, guiding them toward the living room, the heart of the home where dreams had once flourished. As they entered, they were met with a sight both haunting and mesmerizing. Faded photographs lined the walls, depicting a family in a time long gone. Laughter and memories trapped within the frames became eerily tangible, a stark contrast to the urgency of their situation. Tom's mind was already scanning the room. "Look," he pointed, excitement igniting his voice. But just as they made their way toward it, they heard a distinct rustle and the atmosphere shifted. The shuffling noise turned into footsteps, growing closer, and suddenly, the palpable stillness burst like a bubble. A gravelly voice called from the depths of the house, pulling their hearts into a vice. Jake's instincts kicked in, adrenaline flooding his body. He hissed, both men dropping to the floor, hiding behind the coffee table as a light flicked on in the corner. The figure emerged slowly, an old man with a weathered face, deep-set eyes that seemed to penetrate the darkness with sheer determination. Harold, the farmer, his frame wrapped in threadbare clothes, moved with an unmistakable familiarity through the room. He was awake, alert, and very much aware. He called again, voice edged with caution. He looked around, eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, searching for the intruders. Jake and Tom held their breaths, hearts thudding like war drums. Clenching their fists, they felt desperation rearing its head, and for a moment it seemed that every ounce of courage they had possessed had drained away into the shadows. "Maybe we should just leave," Jake whispered, panic gripping him with icy fingers. "That's not an option now," Tom gasped, eyes wide as he gestured to the jar on the table. In that moment, a single thought surged through Jake. If they ran, they would be leaving behind the very opportunity that had drawn them to this place. But if they stayed, what awaited them could be far worse. It was a game of fate, and they stood still as stones, torn between risk and caution. Harold moved cautiously, peering around furniture and glancing up at the ceiling, the old wooden beams creaking softly overhead. "Every crook in this area knows better than to come here," he muttered, hardly aware of the two thieves lying mere feet away. The thick silence in the room swelled, and suddenly the vulnerability that had consumed Jake gave way to a sense of defiance. "Maybe he won't see us," Jake suggested, pausing as hope flickered. But as they remained concealed beneath the table, the farmer's instincts kicked in. He had lived through decades of uncertainty, and his survival had been built on vigilance and grit. With a deep breath, he made a decisive choice, launching into a search that would end the thieves' plans abruptly. Harold called, his voice steady, filled with authority. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. The fear that gripped Jake twisted into a sense of dread. What would this man do to them if he found them? Jake's heart raced, his mind running through possibilities. They were intruders in this man's home, and old men often have tricks up their sleeves born from years of laying claim to their territory. Just as Harold turned his back to the table, searching along the walls, Jake made a brave move. He shouted, heart pounding in his ears. Harold whipped around, surprise dancing across his features as he squinted into the dim light. Adrenaline coursed through Jake, the rush mingling with fear and shame. We just wanted to take some cash." "We thought you wouldn't be awake," he stammered, feeling the vulnerability of their situation fully realized. The old farmer stood tall, his posture betraying strength and authority born from years of hard labor. "You thought wrong," he said, his voice steady but edged with a hint of disappointment. "This place ain't for scoundrels." Tom, ever the impulsive one, surged to his feet, hands raised. "We're sorry, we just—" Harold shot back, disappointment giving way to anger. Under his watchful gaze, the two burglars began to crumble. Jake pleaded, guilt clawing at him as he struggled to search for any sense of salvation. "Yet here you are, hiding in corners and lurking in the shadows. This ain't a game, boys," Harold replied, his voice poignant, piercing through the remnants of bravado that lingered in the air. "Let me be very clear, I've faced a lot in my life." The weight of Harold's words hung heavily between them, a strange understanding pulling at Jake's heart. This man wasn't just an old farmer, he was a guardian of his land, a man forged by years of hardship and vigilance. What if we? Jake found himself saying before he could comprehend the offer's magnitude. "There's a fine line between desperation and dignity," Harold replied, studying them with creased brows. Tom's eyes widened at the suggestion, but Jake felt a flicker of hope rise within him. Here was a chance to change the narrative, to move from darkness into light. He urged. Harold looked from Jake to Tom, weighing his options carefully. Jake said, determination clawing its way to the surface, "I promise we'll be better." With the weight of his years resting heavily on his shoulders, Harold took a deep breath, the tension in the air beginning to dissipate. "All right," he finally said, voice resolute. "You want to help me?" As dawn broke over the horizon and the sun's first rays filtered through the windows, Jake and Tom found themselves standing beside Harold, who began to impart wisdom that would forever change their lives. They exchanged handshakes, tentative yet filled with possibility, and took the first steps onto a path filled with hard work, humility, and lessons learned. The journey ahead would be long, and the stakes remained high. But what they discovered amid the sweat and toil would forge their souls in ways their previous life of crime never could. In the throes of early morning light, a bond began to form, one that transcended the direct path of lives once lost in desperation. Jake and Tom had unwittingly crossed into the embrace of redemption, altering not only their own destinies, but the heart of the land that welcomed them. In the face of adversity and darkness, they found a flicker of hope, igniting something beautiful in their hearts, a testament to the strength of change, born from unexpected places. The night was still, cloaked in a blanket of darkness that stretched endlessly over the quiet fields. The only sound was the distant rustle of leaves whispering secrets to the wind. Nestled among the rolling hills stood a lone farmhouse, its weathered walls illuminated by a faint light flickering from within. Inside, a figure sat alone, watching the world outside through heavy curtains. Little did he know, danger was creeping closer. Two figures approached the farmhouse, moving like shadows against the moonlit landscape. Jake and Tim, two seasoned thieves who had faced their fair share of risks, believed this would be an easy score. After all, it was just an old man living alone. How hard could it be? "Stay low," Jake whispered, nodding toward the front porch. The wooden boards creaked ominously underfoot as they made their way to the entrance. Jake's heart raced. The thrill of the heist filled his veins. He felt invincible, immune to consequences. But Tim was quiet, unease clouding his thoughts. Tim's voice was barely more than a whisper. "Stop being a coward," Jake snapped, forcing himself to push through the door. With a soft click, they entered the darkened hallway, an old wooden table laden with dusty trinkets catching their eyes. Memories of a life once vivid now lay untouched, and yet all they cared about was the potential for quick cash. The dim light illuminated an old, faded photograph on the wall, a family smiling faces, long gone. It was a stark reminder of what the old man had lost, but Jake didn't care. He wanted what he wanted. They moved cautiously deeper into the house, their hearts pounding like war drums. "Let's check the living room first," Jake suggested, eager to find valuables and be out before anyone knew they'd been there. As they stepped inside, they were met by the sight of a humble, rustic living room. A worn-out armchair sat in front of the fireplace, now cold. On the mantelpiece, candles stood like sentinels, waiting for their moment to ignite. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence, a scraping noise from the back of the house. Both men froze, momentarily paralyzed by panic. Jake's stomach dropped. Tim swallowed hard and nodded. But something deep within Jake warned him it was more than that. He didn't want to risk it. "Let's get out," he urged, his instincts screaming, but Tim shook his head. "No way, we need to find something worthwhile first. We already took the risk to break in." Every instinct in Jake told him to retreat, but the allure of easy money kept pulling him forward. Reluctantly, he nodded as they crept toward the back of the house, moving slowly through the narrow hallway. The very walls seemed to hold their breath, waiting for something to happen, and in that heavy silence, Jake felt a creeping sensation, the sensation of being watched. As they neared the kitchen, another sound reached their ears, footsteps shuffling softly against the wooden floor. Jake's heart raced. "We need to hide," he hissed, pulling Tim behind a curtain-laden doorway just as a figure emerged. Harold, the farmer, was older than they had anticipated. his frame hunched but sturdy. His hair was as white as the moonlight spilling through the windows. He moved with a deliberate calm, clearly accustomed to the quiet life of the countryside, yet alert, always alert. He called, his voice deep and commanding, ricocheting off the walls. Jake and Tim exchanged terrified glances, the gravity of their situation becoming painfully clear. They were caught, stranded between the walls of their misdeeds and a determination they had underestimated. Whispered, panic creeping into his voice. "No," Jake replied, a knot tightening in his stomach. "We can't leave now." Harold moved softly through the kitchen, peering into the dim corners where shadows lurked. He reached for something on the counter, a cast iron skeleton. Jake's breath caught. An old man with a skillet. They had come believing he would be defenseless. Suddenly, an idea sparked in Jake's mind. "What if we talk to him? Maybe we can reason with him," he ventured, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Before Tim could protest, Jake stepped out from the darkness, his hands raised. "Hey!" Harold turned, surprise flashing across his face. The old man looked between the two intruders, recognizing the fear etched into their expressions. His voice rang with authority, unwavering even in the face of confrontation. We were just looking for some money. I'm sorry. We didn't want to hurt you," Jake stuttered, aware that words alone could never undo the violation of trespass. Harold narrowed his eyes, taking a step forward. "You think this is just about money?" The words struck like a harsh wind, revealing the core of what they had done. Jake felt a wave of shame wash over him, a sudden realization of the pain they had caused merely by their actions. Tim stood frozen, uncertainty drawing lines across his face. "We didn't think." "Unless your idea of harm includes breaking and entering," Harold replied, his voice steady but tinged with disappointment. He raised the skillet, and for a moment Jake thought of all the excuses in the world. Instead, he chose honesty. "I know this won't fix anything," Jake said earnestly, eyes pleading, "but we're sorry, we're just trying to survive out here." Harold studied him for a moment, the air thick with tension. The old man's shoulders relaxed slightly, but anger still smoldered. "You think the world is tough only for you. I've earned every inch of this land. You want something." Tim echoed, confusion washing over him. Harold gestured to the kitchen. "You want to take? Then come and learn what it means to give." Somewhere deep inside Jake, an ember flickered to life. Here was an opportunity, an unexpected fork in the road that could change everything. He had spent so long running away from responsibility, but perhaps this was a chance to confront it head-on. "If you give us a chance, we will work hard," Jake agreed. Harold studied them, a calculating look on his face as if weighing the words against a lifetime of experience. Then slowly, very slowly, he lowered the skillet. "Fine, one chance." "Thank you," Jake breathed, the weight of relief washing over him. He had expected to be caught, to pay for their mistakes in a much harsher way. Instead, he found himself standing at the precipice of redemption. With a nod of approval, the old man turned and beckoned them to follow him into the heart of the home, the very place where lives were forged. Laughter echoed in the hallways, and hard work became a way of life. The next few weeks were laborious, filled with sweat and toil. Under Harold's watchful eye, they learned the value of effort, the appreciation of soil turning beneath shovels, the richness of planting seeds, and the satisfaction of watching life bloom. It was grueling work, but through every blister and ache, they began to discover a sense of purpose. But it wasn't just the labor that changed them. Harold shared stories of his life, tales tinted with loss and triumph, revealing the spirit of a man who had fought through the storms. With each story, Jake and Tim were reminded that every moment has weight, every action carved its mark on the world. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table after a long day, Harold reached for a piece of bread, breaking it in half. "You share what you earn with the people you trust and respect," he said, his gaze steady on the two young men. "You too want to change." As they sat there, something within Jake shifted. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of belonging. The burdens of desperation lifted, replaced with hope and purpose. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Jake and Tim found themselves growing in ways they had never imagined. The field they tended no longer felt like just work. It became a refuge. They formed bonds, not only with the land but with Harold, who became a mentor they never knew they needed. Without warning, autumn arrived, and the fields were ripe for harvest. It was a season filled with colors and life, a stark contrast to the darkness that had once clouded their minds. They worked harder than ever, hands stained and weary but spirits renewed. During one of those long afternoons under a sun burning bright, Jake turned to Tim with a grin. "Can you believe this? Just a few months ago we were breaking into this place and now..." Tim chuckled, a sense of pride radiating from him. "Yeah, no kidding." It was a beautiful moment, a life slowly reshaped, where two former thieves had become men of purpose through the unlikeliest of circumstances, proving that redemption exists within our choices. One evening, as they gathered back in the farmhouse after a long day, they prepared for dinner. Harold's voice boomed through the kitchen as he shared another story of his youth, laughter echoing around the room. Jake felt a warmth spreading through him, a feeling he had not known in too long. It was here, in this quaint farmhouse surrounded by fields alive with possibility, that they had found dignity in the simplest of acts, a shared meal on a table that held deeper meaning. As the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving trails of gold and purple across the sky, Jake and Tim knew their lives had transformed forever. They stood together, not just as friends, but as brothers in a journey of hope and hard work, with a shared hunger for something more profound than themselves. And who would have thought that two burglars could find their way back to life through the compassion of a farmer who had heard them coming? In the echoing laughter, the warmth of shared stories, and the spirit of resilience, they found their place in a world they thought they had lost. It was a twist of fate that would forever redefine their lives, showing them that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to the most remarkable destinations. The night was thicker than a fog, the kind that swallows sound and wraps everything in stillness. In the dim glow of the moonlight, a lonely farmhouse stood in the midst of sprawling fields. To the casual observer, it might seem like a tranquil retreat, a place where the farmer would rest after a long day in the fields. But tonight, something far more sinister was brewing beneath that calm facade. Two figures edged closer, barely noticeable against the backdrop of shadows. They were Jake and Tom, amateur thieves with a plan that felt bold and reckless. As they crept toward the back door, nerves and adrenaline intertwined, creating a cocktail of excitement and fear in their veins. "Just be quick about it," Jake whispered, glancing behind him, half expecting the ghost of a watchful eye. Tom nodded, his eyes darting nervously. "I hope that old man isn't home," he muttered, fidgeting as they reached the door. With a shaky hand, Jake tested the knob. Surprisingly, it turned easily. The door creaked as they pushed it open, a sound that echoed in the stillness. Inside, the air felt heavy, thick with the scent of aged wood and something else, a faint hint of nostalgia. They stepped into the small entryway, unsure of what to expect next. Dim light spilled from a single lamp in the living room, illuminating the dust particles floating through the air. To the right, photos hung on the wall depicting a family smiling faces frozen in moments that felt worlds away from the men entering their space. "Look at this place," Tom breathed, taking a tentative step forward. "What's an old farmer gonna have?" "Maybe a rifle," Jake added, a flicker of anxiety crossing his mind. The thought sent a cold shiver down his spine, but he quickly pushed it aside. They had come too far to turn back now. Moving cautiously through the narrow hallway, they paused at the living room door, the glow of light spilling into the darkness like an invitation. Jake hesitated, his instincts screaming that something was off, but Tom urged him on with a silent nod. They stepped inside. The living room was a picture of wear and age. A large armchair dominated the corner, and an old television flickered softly, casting shadows across the room. It felt like a scene from another time, imbued with a sense of history, richness, and yet vulnerability. "Check that drawer," Tom muttered, nodding toward a worn coffee table. Jake approached the table, lowering himself as he yanked open the drawer with a cautious tug. His heart raced as he rifled through the contents: old newspapers, a half-burned candle, but no cash. Frustration curled in his chest. "Nothing but junk," he grumbled. Just then, the faint sound of shuffling reached their ears. Both men froze, their breathing abruptly stilled. The noise was unmistakable, footsteps echoing softly against the wooden floor somewhere in the back of the house. Jake whispered, a chill crawling up his spine. Tom's eyes widened. "It's gotta be him." Jake felt the heavy weight of dread settle around them. We can't get caught. But just as they turned to flee, the sound grew louder, more defined. It was coming from the hallway, the unmistakable shuffle of an old man, and with each step, the thick tension rose, wrapping around them like a noose. They stumbled into the nearest room, ducking behind a stack of musty boxes. Jake's heart hammered in his chest, and in that moment the adrenaline that had once fueled his bravado turned to cold fear. "Stay quiet," he hissed, peering through a crack in the boxes. The door creaked open, and in stepped Harold, the farmer, his face weathered, eyes sharp and aware. He moved slowly but purposefully, taking in each corner of his home as if he could sense the intrusion lingering in the air. There was something in his posture, a warrior-like grace that hinted he had seen more than his share of trouble over the years. He called out into the darkness, his voice like rolling thunder, echoing through the old walls. Jake's stomach twisted. Had they been spotted? Had he mistaken the sound of old bones for a sense of doom? The fear of being discovered coiled tightly around him, making each breath feel like a laborious task. They held their breaths as Harold searched the room, eyes scrutinizing the shadows where Jake and Tom hid. He moved with the confidence born of years spent defending his territory, every inch of that farmhouse marked with history and memory. Harold shouted. There was a calm authority in his tone, as if he was accustomed to dealing with threats. The fear paralyzed Jake. He wanted to run to escape the consequences of their choices, but the instinct to hide held him fast. He and Tom exchanged worried glances, knowing they faced an unpredictable force. Tom whispered, his voice trembling. Jake shot back. "We can't risk it." But as Harold continued his search, an undeniable truth settled in. The old man would fight back if he had to. They couldn't underestimate him. Years of hard work had fortified his spirit. Finally, Harold shuffled into the living room, the faint glow highlighting his furrowed brow. In that moment, Jake made a choice. He stepped out from behind the boxes, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Wait," he called, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Harold paused, surprise flashing across his weathered face. "You think you can just break into my home?" We just thought we could grab some cash," Jake admitted, feeling shame wash over him. Harold replied, narrowing his eyes. "No, I mean yes," but Jake stumbled over his words, his urgency grappling with honesty. "We're just desperate." Tim, emboldened by Jake's bravery, stepped out as well, his hands raised. "We didn't mean any harm, sir," he added quickly. For a moment, the air crackled with tension. Harold's gaze held them captive, assessing, calculating. Asked, his voice low and steady. Jake felt something shift inside him, a flicker of vulnerability. "I know it sounds wrong, but we've hit rock bottom." With a sigh, Harold shook his head. "You don't have to live your life like this." Tom blurted out, skeptical. "Like working hard for what you want," Harold replied, a glimmer of understanding emerging in his eyes. "A job," the word hung in the air like a lifeline, and both Jake and Tom exchanged incredulous looks. "Here?" Jake asked, surprised. Harold replied, "You're stealing out of desperation, and it's clear you need help." The offer rippled through the room, creating a whirlwind of doubt and hope. Could they really abandon their life of crime and start anew under this old man's guidance? Tom asked suspiciously, still wary but intrigued. "No catch," Harold said, looking straight at them. "But know this, it'll be hard work. You have to earn your keep and learn respect. You steal from me again and I'll call the cops." Jake felt hope bloom in his chest, replacing the creeping despair that had clouded his mind for so long. What did they have to lose? "All right," he said finally, stepping forward with a determined look in his eyes. The old man nodded, satisfaction flickering in his gaze. "Then let's get started." The days that followed were nothing short of grueling. They rose before dawn with Harold, heading out to the fields and learning the ins and outs of farming, plowing rows, planting seeds, and tending to crops. It was an exhausting routine, but as the sun rose over the horizon, Jake and Tom discovered a rhythm that felt oddly comforting. With each passing day, they found themselves gaining strength, not just in their muscles but in character. They owed their survival to hard work rather than theft, and that feeling of purpose invigorated them in ways they hadn't anticipated. And amid the labor, they also discovered Harold, his wisdom weaving a new narrative. He would share stories of his life, the hardship of making a living off the land, his days filled with struggles yet intertwined with resilience. "You think hard work isn't worth it," Harold would say, eyes glimmering in the sunlight. As they learned to plant and harvest, something within Jake began to shift. He felt a growing sense of pride in what they were doing. There was no longer a dark cloud of shame weighing them down. Instead, they forged ahead, building a new future. But just when they began to feel secure, the weight of their past shadowed them once more. One evening, a local sheriff flew by the farmhouse, headlights illuminating the dirt driveway like spotlights. Jake felt his stomach drop. The fear of consequences loomed large, and he wanted to run. He whispered, anxiety gripping him like a vice. Harold noticed the tension in their shoulders, gently placing a hand on Jake's arm. As the sheriff continued past, the air slowly relaxed, the grip of fear uncoiling. But deep down, Jake felt a burning need to prove that he had changed, to banish the shadows once and for all. Tom asked one day as they worked the fields. Harold paused, considering. "Depends. Would it be out of fear or out of understanding?" Through those words, Jake understood a profound truth. It wasn't only about property, it was about respect for oneself and others. And he vowed never to fall back into that life of desperation that had once driven him to make those choices. Weeks morphed into months, and as the harvest drew near, the farmhouse flourished with newfound life. Jake and Tom had become part of something bigger, a community brought together through shared labor and hope, and the weight of their criminal past began to fade. One afternoon under the golden sun, they gathered around the table to celebrate the bounty of the land, a feast that paid tribute to their hard work. Laughter echoed through the air, and for the first time in ages, Jake felt a sense of belonging, a warmth radiating from friendship and the shared journey of growth. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Jake marveled at how far he had come. Redemption had tasted far sweeter than theft ever could, and in the heart of the farmer who had once caught him, he found friendship and purpose. In the end, they were not just thieves. They had transformed into workers, nurturers of the land, and champions of their destinies. Together, they had crafted a new narrative, a testament to resilience birthed from the darkest of nights, revealing that sometimes the most profound lessons happen when you least expect them, and heroes can rise from the most unlikely places. The night was cloaked in darkness, a veil so thick it swallowed sound, leaving only the whisper of the wind as it danced through the trees. In the middle of the countryside, a lone farmhouse stood illuminated by the pale moonlight, its creaky wooden structure housing years of memories and secrets. But tonight, it was about to become the scene of a dangerous game, played between fate and desperation. Two figures emerged from the shadows, Jake and Tom, two small-time burglars driven by a hunger for quick cash. They had heard whispers in the tavern about the old farmer, known for his solitary life and an unguarded stash of cash. With the promise of an easy haul, they made their way toward the farmhouse, fueled by a mix of adrenaline and naivete. "This is going to be easy," Jake said, his voice low but brimming with excitement. Tom, however, wore a face of uncertainty. "You sure we should be doing this? Risky is what life is. You want to keep scraping by." Jake shot back, his bravado spilling over. They crept toward the back door, hearts beating hard in their chests. Jake fumbled with the handle, adrenaline making his fingers clumsy. With a soft click, the door swung open, allowing a gust of stale air to greet them. Inside, the darkness enveloped them like a shroud, and for a moment they hesitated, the weight of their choice hanging heavily in the air. "Let's move," Jake whispered, stepping inside. The pasty aroma of old wood and long-forgotten dinners filled his nostrils. Without thinking, he could almost picture the warm glow of a family gathering, smiles and laughter, a stark contrast to the cold, hard reality they were about to insert themselves into. They moved down the narrow hallway, glancing at the walls lined with fading photographs depicting a life that had long since faded into memory. Jake felt a flicker of guilt but quickly brushed it aside. They were here for survival, he reminded himself. Find the living room. "That's where the money usually is," Jake instructed, his voice steady as he shoved aside emotions fighting to surface. As they approached the living room, a sudden noise stopped them in their tracks, a distinct creak as if someone else was awake in the house. Tom's voice trembled slightly. "Just the house settling," Jake replied, although his resolve was slipping. It felt like they had stepped into a scene far larger than themselves, a place where stakes were much higher. They peered into the living room, and what they saw froze them in place. The old farmer sat in a worn armchair, staring blankly at the flickering light of an old lamp. His face was washed in shadows, but the set of his jaw and the way his hands lay poised on his knees spoke volumes. He was awake, alert, and perhaps even aware of their presence. Harold, the farmer, could feel the undercurrents of tension in the air, instincts honed by years of living alone in this quiet house. He sensed that something was off. The stillness of the night was thick with more than just silence. He called out, voice low but commanding. Jake's heart plunged. They were caught. He glanced at Tom, who looked like he wanted to bolt, but Jake held him firm. Not yet. Harold rose from his chair, each movement slow but deliberate, like a predator assessing its surroundings. For a moment, the world faded away. The sound of their breaths filled the air, competing against the shadows that clung to the corners of the room. Harold's tone hardened, each syllable resounding through the thin walls. "Maybe we should leave," Tom whispered, the tremor in his voice betraying his fear. "No," Jake replied, grounding himself. "If we run, he might think we're a threat. We need to talk." With an unsteady breath, Jake stepped out from the shadows with his hands raised, hoping to convey non-threat. "We don't want any trouble," he said, his voice steady but barely masking his fear. Harold asked, his eyes narrowing. "It's not like that," Jake stammered. "We thought no one would be home. Desperation's a poor excuse for theft," Harold replied, his demeanor calm yet fierce. "You think I haven't struggled?" The words hit Jake squarely in the chest, igniting a flurry of emotions buried deep within. Here was this elderly man, embodying strength and conviction, and here they were, two opportunists ready to take what didn't belong to them. Jake hesitated, the truth of their situation washing over him. "We're just trying to survive. Doesn't give you the right to trespass," Harold shot back, crossing his arms. The old man stood firm, like a battered oak against a raging storm. Jake felt the weight of that statement. It dawned on him that they were facing not just a farmer, but a man defending what was rightfully his. An image began to carve itself in his mind. A man who had poured his life into this land, only to watch it fade into the background while young men like him drifted aimlessly. Before Jake could finish, a sound interrupted him, a loud crash from the back of the house. Both men turned, startled, to see the kitchen door swing open. Out came a shadow, small and quick. It was a dog, barking furiously as it darted toward the intruders, sensing the discord that had filled the air. "Zeus!" Harold yelled, but the dog didn't listen, launching itself at Jake, teeth bared. Tom yelped, scrambling backward. In the chaos, Jake instinctively raised his foot, ready to kick the dog away. But at the last moment, he hesitated, realizing that Zeus was just trying to protect his territory. Instead, he crouched down, hands extended, trying to show he meant no harm. "Easy, buddy," he coaxed, staying calm as the dog hesitated, unsure. Slowly, Zeus's aggressive stance softened, and he sniffed the air, curiosity overtaking instinct. "Smart move," Harold said, watching the exchange with slight admiration. In that instant, something shifted. For the first time since entering the farmhouse, Jake felt a flicker of confidence. "Look," he said, straightening up, "we made a mistake. We're not bad guys." Harold demanded, but there was a hint of something else in his tone, curiosity, perhaps. "No, sir," Jake admitted. "But if you let us explain, maybe you'll understand that we're looking for a way out of this life." Harold countered, but there was softness in his gaze, an acknowledgement of shared struggle hidden beneath years of resolve. "Because you've faced your own struggles," Jake shot back. "You didn't become who you are by taking the easy way out. You worked hard, and we want that. We're tired of running." The tension in the room began to ebb, and Harold studied the two men, weighing their words against his own experiences. In those brief moments, he saw not just thieves, but lost souls seeking redemption. "All right," he finally said, relaxing his stance. "You can work for me, but you need to prove yourselves worthy." Tom blinked in surprise. "Don't mistake my kindness for weakness," Harold cautioned, voice steady. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Thank you," he said, sincerity etched into his features. "Don't thank me yet," Harold replied, a twinkle of something almost like amusement flickering in his eyes. The sunrise broke over the horizon, painting the fields in hues of gold and green as Jake and Tom began their new chapter. They quickly learned the ins and outs of farm life, rising before dawn, digging their hands into the earth and discovering the beauty of hard work. Days turned into weeks, each moment filled with sweat and effort, but also laughter and camaraderie. They learned about crops and livestock, about the seasons and the rhythm of the land. They found purpose in routine, and that purpose began to reshape their understanding of life. Harold watched as they transformed, slowly breaking free from their pasts. He shared his stories about the struggles he faced, teaching them that life's hardships weren't meant to break them. They were there to forge resilience. One evening, as they gathered for dinner under the fading light, Jake looked around the table, at Harold's lined face, at the warmth radiating from the home he now felt a part of. It was a stark contrast to the darkness they had once lived in. "This is everything," Jake said, glancing at Tom, who nodded in agreement. "You've done it by working together, by learning humility," Harold replied, pride resonating in his voice. The seasons passed, and as autumn enveloped the farm, a rich harvest awaited them. Jake and Tom reveled in their newfound lives, the scars of their past slowly fading. The realization dawned on them that the true measure of a man wasn't what he had taken, but what he was willing to fight for. Then came the day of the Harvest Festival, the vibrant celebration of crops, community, and resilience. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the field, laughter filled the air, and joy surged in their hearts. As they danced and shared stories, Jake thought back to that fateful night. They had walked into that farmhouse hungry for cash, but found so much more purpose, family, redemption. Now, surrounded by the laughter of friends and the promise of new beginnings, they had rewritten their story, one rooted in courage, hard work, and a profound understanding of the human spirit. And in that moment, Jake realized that sometimes unexpected paths lead to the most remarkable destinies, illuminating the darkest corners and uncovering the power of hope. The old farmhouse had given him more than he ever bargained for, teaching him that life truly began when they chose to turn back from the edge. The moon hung high, casting a silvery glow over the quiet countryside. In the stillness of the night, beneath the backdrop of twinkling stars, a lone farmhouse stood like a sentinel, its weathered wooden beams telling stories of years gone by. But tonight, the stories were about to take a violent turn. In the shadows, two figures slinked closer, their hearts racing with a mix of adrenaline and anxiety. Jake and Tom, two small-time burglars, were desperate and hungry. Their minds buzzed with thoughts of quick cash, the thrill of the heist pulsing through their blood. They had been watching the old man who lived in the farmhouse for weeks, convinced he wouldn't be a challenge. "Keep your head low and watch your step," Jake whispered, barely audible over the noise of the wind. Fear and excitement danced in his chest as they approached the back door, the battered wood seeming to creak under the weight of their intentions. Tom shifted nervously, glancing over his shoulder. "Then we'll be quick. Just grab what we need and get out," Jake replied, his bravado cracking slightly. He could almost feel the weight of their choices pressing against him like a heavy cloak. Jake took a deep breath, grasping the doorknob with a sweaty palm. A quick twist and the door swung open, a low groan reverberating through the stillness. They stepped inside, the stale air enveloping them like a thick fog. The darkness seemed to whisper secrets, raps of old history echoing in the corners. "Let's make this quick," Jake muttered, scanning the dimly lit room. A single lamp flickered in the corner, casting shadows against the peeling wallpaper. Faded photographs of a family adorned the walls, smiles frozen in time images of a life they were trespassing on. Tom asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "The living room first," Jake decided, leading the way down the narrow hallway. Each step felt like a countdown, the floorboards creaking ominously beneath their weight. Jake could feel his heartbeat synchronize with each crunch of wood, creating a rhythm of desperation and dread. As they shoved open the door, the sight before them was both mundane and chilling. An old armchair sat across from a fireplace, now cold and empty. The television flickered in the background, illuminating the room in flickering shadows, but there was no one there, No old man sitting in his chair, no figure watching over the treasures they planned to take. Tom grumbled, moving toward a cabinet on the far side of the room. He yanked open the doors, revealing dusty old novels and mismatched dishes. "Just keep looking," Jake insisted, a surge of impatience gripping him. A sudden noise made them both freeze. It was faint but unmistakable, a sound echoing from the back of the house. It was the unmistakable shuffle of footsteps, growing louder by the second. An icy dread washed over Jake. The old man, Harold, was home. Tom whispered, panic etching lines across his forehead. "SHH." "Just stay quiet," Jake hissed, the thrill of their plan evaporating into fear. The footsteps grew closer, the shuffle of old shoes against wood announcing that the farmer was moving through his domain, and suddenly the reality of their actions crashed down like a heavy anchor. Tom's voice quavered. Jake clenched his jaw, uncertainty gnawing at him. He glanced toward the doorway as the footsteps approached. "No, if we run now, he'll know we're here." They hurriedly looked for a place to conceal themselves, moving behind a tall bookshelf just as the living room door creaked open. Harold the farmer stepped inside, each movement slow yet steady, seasoned by the years. His hair was as white as the moonlight streaming through the window, and his eyes, sharp and piercing, scanned the room. He called, an edge of authority cutting through the stillness. Jake and Tom held their breath, hearts pounding wildly. The stark reality hit them. The old man could easily be a force to reckon with. There was something in his stare that warned them he had fought battles before, a fire that refused to dim. Harold barked, his voice echoing through the quiet space. A chilling silence followed, heavy with the weight of fear. Jake stared at Tom, their eyes wide with panic. Every instinct screamed for them to bolt, but there was nowhere to go. Harold would surely hear their meager attempts to escape. "Get ready," Jake whispered under his breath, his heart racing. Harold began to walk deeper into the room, weight shifting to his heel with purpose. Jake could almost hear the steady thump of his heart beating in sync with the tremors of their fear. The air felt electric, crackling with tension. Suddenly the farmer paused, his intuition sharper than either man had anticipated. He turned slowly, surveying the very shadows where they hid. "I know someone's here," he declared, voice unyielding. The weight of their presence bore down on Jake and Tom. They were mere seconds away from being discovered, caught in the very act that could land them in a world of trouble. Tom hissed, eyes wide with dread. "We can't let that happen," Jake replied, adrenaline coursing through him. He silently braced himself, preparing to leap into action if necessary. But before he could act, Harold pulled back slightly and flicked on the overhead light. The room flooded with brightness, illuminating every corner, turning shadows into stark reality. Jake and Tom's hearts raced, each thud echoing in their ears like a battle drum. As the light spilled across the room, the reality of their world shifted. Tom hissed, panic rising. "Let's talk to him," Jake said suddenly, a boldness he didn't quite feel surfacing. Tom feebly protested. Jake snapped back. Seeing Tom's uncertainty, Jake made the decision. He stepped out from behind the bookshelf, hands raised in a gesture of peace. He called, words spilling from his mouth in a rush. Harold's eyes narrowed, taking in the sight of the two young men. "Well, you sure have made trouble for yourselves." "We were, looking for cash. We thought no one would be here," Jake admitted, guilt washing over him. Harold echoed, his voice low with disdain. Harold's calm infuriated Jake. "We're just trying to survive." "Oh, I know," Harold replied, his voice steady. Suddenly, a flicker of understanding crept into Harold's gaze. "It doesn't have to be like this," Jake pressed, desperation creeping into his voice. The tension in the air was palpable, and Jake felt his resolve wavering. Behind him, Tom looked ready to bolt, the possibility of getting caught hanging heavily above them. Then Harold stepped closer, eyes piercing through the front they tried to maintain. "You two think you can just walk away from this?" Each word felt like a jab, chipping away at any argument Jake could think of. They were facing not just a man, but a testament to years of hard work, a life built on sweat and sacrifice. Would they really have the audacity to claim it as their own? As the silence stretched, Harold's gaze softened slightly. Jake felt his heart race again. "You can work for me," Harold proposed, his voice steady. "Prove to me you can contribute rather than take." Tom's eyes flashed with disbelief. "You want us to work for you?" Consider it an opportunity for redemption, Harold said, eyes piercing yet hopeful. But know this, I won't tolerate any more nonsense. Jake exchanged wide-eyed glances with Tom, the reality of what they were being offered settling in. Give us a chance, Jake said quietly, the words tumbling out. We'll prove we can change. The tension in the room shifted, their desperation morphing into a flicker of hope. All right then, Harold replied, crossing his arms as he regarded them. You can start tomorrow morning. As the evening wore on, a strange feeling of relief washed over Jake and Tom, who would have thought that instead of facing punishment, they were being offered a lifeline. As they left the farmhouse, Jake felt a spark of determination. Maybe this was the change they desperately needed. But just as they stepped into the cool night air, a sudden noise blared through the silence, a siren piercing the tranquility like a knife. Jake's heart dropped and dread pooled in his stomach. What the Tom started, panic flashing in his eyes. Jake hissed, urgency igniting their movements as they rushed back into the house, hoping they hadn't been seen. What do we do? Tom stammered, glancing wildly around the room as the sirens grew louder. Harold's face darkened. He barked, the authoritative tone snapping them back to reality. We can't let them see you. Without thinking, Jake and Tom ducked behind the old couch, holding their breath. The sirens wailed outside, the lights flashing through the windows, casting a chaotic glow across the room. Suddenly, the front door burst open, and a police officer stormed inside, authoritative and commanding. He demanded, scanning the room with sharp eyes. Jake and Tom exchanged terrified glances, their hearts racing, their fate now hanging in the balance. Stay quiet, Harold murmured, his voice a low growl as he stepped forward to confront the officer. As the flash of police lights swept through the farmhouse, time slowed to a crawl. Would they be caught? Would the weight of their past decisions truly crush their opportunity to change? The tension hung thick in the air, and as Harold faced the officer, Jake realized they had stepped onto a knife's edge, teetering dangerously close to a fall that could undo everything they had worked for. The night held its breath, and the outcome remained uncertain, suspended in a world where choices echoed long after they were made. In the shadows, they waited, not just for the police to leave, but to see if they could forge a new path, or if they would be engulfed by the very darkness they thought they had escaped.